Sebastiano Rengabo to talk to us. He has 45 minutes on, as they say, big is big, right? Yes, that's what you say in Kampala. So we're going to hear from, that's the time we allocated him, and then we will go into the plenary, into the open discussions when we will field the questions and get comments in, in responses. Let's then hear from Doctor. Doctor, you're most welcome to talk to us.
David, I'm without energy, so I may need an energizer before we start. But
what type of energizer do you want? Do you want all of us to stand up?
Electrical and electronic. As that works out, I shall request all of you to stand up and hear these 4 things as I speak. Number 1, to play politics by ideology and interests is maturity. Play politics by identity is immaturity and rudimentary. Number 2, when you see political actors, whether here or there, playing politics basing on identity, you know that behind them is one strong force: mistrust and suspicion. Mistrust and suspicion. When you see politicians propagating and driving and moving and shouting by identity, you know they don't trust and they suspect other identity groups. Number 3, to have an identity is human. To deny your identity is abnormal. But to use your identity as the basis for prejudicing others is inhuman. The final idea is building on my sister Tracy's submission. There is no, at least today, African group that should be called a tribe. So from today onward, if you're a good student, stop calling yourself or another group a tribe. You can see it. Does everyone read my screen? Is everyone able to read the bottom of the screen? Thank you very much. The leadership of the Netherlands Institute for Multi-Party Democracy and the Uganda Democracy Academy, my brother and Musanje, Charles Odongtho. Your wife should explain to you what a Musanje is. I deserve a goat. So you have to invite me for a goat roasting. Fellow Ugandans, fellow Africans, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Now, there is this misleading conception which Tracy talks about. The conception is that what's happening? I'm going to protest. Yes, searching for what? I'm going to protest. Is there no Protestant here who can help me in this protestation? Atai, my lovely and loving Atai, why don't you help me in this protestation? Because we are losing time. And these are deep things. And I was put on the cross to be able to speak about these difficult things. But use this. There is this misconception that African ethnic groups are called tribes. That other groups are not tribes. Are you sure there is power there? There is this bias that African identity groups, I don't know whether everyone behind is reading here or whether we should raise this like this, but I hope everyone is reading. That these groups are tribes. How do I remove that interruptive screen? That those of the whites, people you call whites, like the Flanders, the Angles, the Frisian, the Corsican, the Danish, the Dutch, the Croats, the Irish, the Finns, the Norse, the Danes, the Normans, the Roma, that those are nations. But the Baganda, the Banyoro, the Bandika, the Dogons, through migration, integration, socialization, and cultural convergence. And what happens is that tribes are expected to be primitive groups. In my view today, no African group, even then, was so primitive that it lacked its own science, belief systems, social and political organization, or rules about production and productivity. There was no such African group at the time that we first interacted with the Europeans. In fact, European colonial efforts to colonize the Congo by the Dutch lasted 400 years. The British effort after the Industrial Revolution and the Maxim gun to colonize Bunyoro here lasted from 1872, when Kabarega defeated Samuel Beck at the Battle of Masindi, to 1955, when the last Bunyoro agreement was signed. Show me a European tribe that would fight an imperial war for all these years. Is there any? I'm yet to find a nation which is more culturally developed and organized than many of the African groups, like the Baganda, the Mandika, the Banyoro here, as well as the Dogons, which are a bit more complicated than most social groups I have studied. Thereafter, when Nimd asked me to talk about this and said, the role of religion and tribalism, I said, no. I never used the word tribe in my language and in my writing. You can look them up. I have many writings you can easily access. I never use this word about Africans because I know it refers to primitive people. And when I tried to call Europeans and other groups tribes, they said, no, for us we are not tribes. So I said, now you must be propagating your own misleading superiority complex. So, this is how it goes. All areas that are inhabited by human beings undergo through processes of social political development. Maybe we shade off this light so that people can see. Is it possible to shade off a part of the light so that people can see more properly? Because I think people behind cannot read this. In my view, there were 3 channels of political development in this part of the world before colonialism. The ethno-nationalist integration process was a process where groups would conquer and mix with others. And those who had been conquered or who had migrated and become socialized would disappear. Not that they would die, but they would get a new identity, right? Just as an American comes here and we give him nationality and he becomes a Ugandan, we have Indians who are Ugandans, right? So you can't call them Indians, right? So kingdom areas like Punt, Nkore, Buganda consisted of processes of ethno-fusion between groups, and when they mixed, certain other groups would disappear. In the case of Buganda, for example, even if you migrated as a big group, you would start by being a Mupakasi. For instance, if you came and you started working on someone's farm. Then later you became a Musenze. You became a migrant, now you are living somewhere. Then later you would become integrated and you become Omutaka. Omutaka would translate as a soilist, right? You become Omutaka. You have been integrated, and from there you could be appointed the chief, you could do all sorts of things. You would then become Omuganda. But if you were conquered by a certain Baganda expedition or military expedition or colonization process, you would be asked to adopt Luganda as your mother tongue or as your official language, to accept the Kabaka as the Sabasajja, and to adopt a Chiganda clan. And those would be the negotiation tools. And most groups had no reason to resist, because there were no demands of blood and what? And destruction. Eventually, the Bakenyi, the Baziba, the Baruri, the Bakenyi, Baziba, Baruri, Basese, all of them became Baganda. Some of you here who are Baganda may be those groups. And others of you may never have heard of those groups. But they are here and they are Baganda. This was called ethno-nationalist integration, to use languages of political scientists. There was imperialist state building, which consisted in conquer and installment of proteges, of stooges, who would rule on your behalf. This normally took place when the state expanded beyond the capacity of the ruling circles to extend direct control. And this is what happened in areas like Congo, Bunyoro, Ethiopia, the Ghana Empire. You have heard of Mandika Empire. You would not be able to impose your language, to impose your clans, to impose your culture on the people, but you would send people who would rule on your behalf. According to the Bunyoro tradition, Buganda was founded by Katochimera, who was a twin brother of Isingo Maruchidimpuga. Ruchidimpuga and Katochimera were the children of the king of Bunyoro, king called Chomia. So Kato was sent here to rule on behalf of the ruling family in Bunyoro. So Buganda was a state which was under the imperial control of Bunyoro Chitara. But according to Bugandan tradition, Buganda kingdom was founded by Chintu, who migrated from the east. It is possible that Chintu was Kundu from the Ergons. But whatever the truth is, I don't know now, because there is no DNA testing on the basis of which I can test which of these theories is correct. But the idea I'm talking about is that imperial conquests meant that certain identities remained even if they would be under the control of certain peoples. Then there were microstate formations which resisted conquest and which resisted overarching centralized rule, but established small polities, small spaces of governance like clans and chieftainships, under which people organized themselves. Within these small spaces, there would be cultural convergence. Hence, you have clans and clan chiefs in, for instance, northern Uganda, where the Ramogi, for instance, had their own clan leader, and then the other clan had their own leaderships, and these leaderships would interact and converge. And this is where you have decentralized systems in Rango, in Acholi, in Chigezi, and other areas. This was the situation before colonial what? Subterfuge. Comes colonial rule. In the case of Uganda, since the 1890s, this is what happened. The colonialists designed a process which began with the investigation. What are these people like? You heard that they sent explorers, speak and what have you. They sent missionaries. They sent anthropologists. All these were intelligence officers assigned both directly and indirectly to come and tell Europeans about how these people are like. Now, all these people wrote reports and submitted to the colony or to their home countries, and then home countries, on the basis of what the anthropologists and the missionaries and the explorers had told them, designed systems of rule. They got some entry point and knew, since there is a conflict between Bunyoro and Buganda, and this is an expansionist conflict just like you see between Russia and Ukraine. There was nothing unusual about the expansionist conflict between Bunyoro and Buganda. Bunyoro was trying to recover its lost imperial state. Buganda was protecting its independence against Bunyoro's expansionism. Simple. Same logic in Ukraine. And then the British say, if we had find an entry point, we have to come and support one against the other. Of course, they had failed to conquer Bunyoro in 1872. Kabalega had defeated them at the Battle of Masindi. So created an alliance with Buganda, which genuinely desired an ally to help them in fending off Bunyoro's expansionist policy. So when the Ukrainians go to America and to NATO and say, please help us, the Russians want to take us over, there is nothing different from what the Buganda did at the time, trying to create an ally. But soon or later, Ukraine may be colonized by the West, like Uganda got colonized by the West. So, alliances were formed, attacks were organized. The army, the colonial military that defeated Bunyoro, or at least that defeated Kabalega and later Mwanga, was commanded by General Semeika Kunguru. Many of you have never heard of General Semeika Kunguru. Idi Amin may come on here and say, I was the first field marshal. No. They were serious generals, and one of them was a Kunguru. So then they expanded their territories, and in order to make sure that Bunyoro does not ally with any of its imperial satellite states of old, such as Toro and Nkore, they had to create a geopolitical stretch of conquest up to Lake Albert. In the normal talk of Ugandans, they call it the lost counties of Buyaga and Bugangais. And they constructed, they established a Kabaka's palace on Lake Albert at a place called Ndaiga. The objective was not to reward Buganda, as many historians have written. The objective was to make sure that it is difficult for the Banyoro to ally with the Batoro and the Banyankore to continue with the resistance. Now, this place became partly Buganda, and since Buganda was an ally, the two historically allied spaces or social-cultural groups were disconnected through that territorial donation. You call it lost counties, but it was geopolitics at play. Just as you are hearing the Crimean area, Crimea in this Russia-Ukrainian war. I'm trying to bring examples so that you don't see that there is nothing unique here that is not happening around the world. Then, co-optation. You bring this group, you bring it nearby, you bring the other one, you bring it nearby. They shifted many Baganda and encouraged them to migrate and settle in those lost counties. The lost counties were 9. Most of you know 2. Many of you don't know that Uganda is a lost county. Many of you don't know that Singo is a lost county. Many of you don't know that all these other places, like to the north, this, what are those places? Bremezi and that further north, Nakasongora, all those are lost counties. In all these processes, the British were fueling ethnic and religious divides in order to avoid people uniting together. And they were awarding and rewarding those who worked with them and punishing those who refused to work with them. Doesn't Museveni do this? Does he do it? He awards those who work with him and calls them cadres. He punishes those who oppose him and he calls them what? So there is nothing unique about colonial machinations to rule here. There is nothing different from what you politicians do, even as you pretend and blame the colonialists. But I will show you the entry points. Did it. Now, the colonial identity machinations took many forms, but these 4 should be standing out clearly. The first was tribalization. The process of creating tribes where they don't exist. 1, they used this derogatory reference to us as tribal groups. That was the starting point. That the Baganda are not a nation. But they are socio-cultural and politically more organized than England. Read history. They are more organized than England. How do you say they are a tribe? And then even the Baganda who have gone to university, they accept it. So from today, I would like to request you to be better students. The second one was to the imposed belonging to tribes. Now that we have created this as a Baganda tribe, everyone within this space is a Muganda. Okay. If you don't accept it, in the lost counties, I had a rumor that the Banyoro who refused to change their names would not be baptized in the church. I am still verifying that rumor. That in the lost counties, those counties which were donated to Buganda, the Banyoro who refused to be Gandized would not be baptized. My brother Akaboy has said that religion and politics have been bedfellows. Now, do you think those priests and bishops were men of God? They were men of the colonists. In areas like Nkore, for those who come from there, they go to the Bahaya. They go to the Bakochi. They go to the Banyibanda. They go to the Banyigara. They go to the Bahororo. They go to the Bampaka. Do you know the Bampaka? The people we call Banyaruguru. They go to the Bampaka. They go to the Banyabuezu and lumped all of them. They also the Banyarwanda and the Banyabukoba, those who had migrated from Tanzania, and lumped all of those and said, you guys, you are Banyankore, henceforth. So the people you call Banyankore, I can show you that there are about 13 different ethnic groups. In Karamoja, many of you think that Karamajonga are one people. But I can tell you that the Ik, the Tepeth, the Nyangia, the Tur, they don't speak Karamojong. The people we call Karamojong, or who speak the language we call Ngakrimojong, are possibly the Mateniko, the Dodoth, and a few others. There are actually 4 groups that are Karamojong. Out of the possibly 11 ethnic groups in Karamoja, only 4 are Karamojong. But they told them, all of you are Karamojong, right? university graduates from there have said yes. If you meet an Ik, he tells you, I'm a Karamojong. You meet a Tur, I am a Karamojong. You meet a J, I am a Karamojong. What the hell is going on? I have told you about the story of Uganda. If we went to Bunyoro, we would find similar stories. If we went to Toro, they go to the Batoro, the Bakonzo, the Bamba, the Babuisi, the Vonoma, the Bachingwe, the Bagabo, and they said, all of you are in Toro. You are Batoro. In fact, the Bakonzo had to run Toro because they had been told, you are Batoro. This is called tribalization. Then they attached these tribal groups to territories. You belong here, you belong here. Across here, you are surely. Who told you that the Baganda must live and stop somewhere in Mubende or in Mitiana or in, and then the Banyoro cannot interact with them? But they created those territorial confines. Then they co-opted geographically these absorption counties and kingdoms and started merging them. Igara was a kingdom, Buhweju was a kingdom, Ibanda was a kingdom, Nkore was a kingdom, Mporo was a kingdom. All of them are now called Nkore kingdom. Those are now examples of the what? Of the co-optations. Then identities got lost, others were co-opted. This is why today some people are emerging and saying, me am a Mukenyi. So who are the Bakenyi? People start asking and raising questions. For us, we are Banyara. The Banyara are not Baganda. And people get surprised. It's because these people existed. Then, they started deploying ethno-linguistic groups in different spaces. Baganda, go and help us colonize Chigezi. Go and help us colonize Eastern Uganda. Go and help us colonize Karamoja. Now, when they had finished their pacification campaign, they retired all the Baganda from the military. Because in case you disagree with the Kabaka and you want to kick him out to London, the Baganda in the army might coup. So when you see coups, counter-coups, coups of attrition, genocides, ethnic cleansings, all these identity crimes, they are always based on mistrust and suspicion. If we keep these Baganda generals in the army, they may become a problem. You see, they are powerful. Kick them out. Then they started recruiting from the north. Many of you don't know where that came from. It was out of the fear, of the suspicion that, look, we don't care about the difference between a Mutoro and a Muganda and a Nachori and a Muganda. All of them are our colony. And in case we have a conflict, these people near us will become a problem. So we have to recruit from the north. There was disproportionate representation of northern Ugandan groups in the colonial armed forces and post-colonial armed forces. The Banyachigeza and Western Nile groups were reserved as labor reserves. Go recruit, deploy in coffee plantations, in tea plantations, and in other plantations and in mining areas. If you went to Kirembe in Kasese, you will find many northern groups and Bachiga. If you went close here to the sugar plantations in eastern Uganda, you will find many West Nile groups. Some families have lived there since time immemorial. You don't know where it came from. That's the origin. So, the whole idea that you are creating tribes and imposing identities on them and imposing certain roles and certain pieces of work and certain jobs upon them, that's how it came about. And they would propagate these beliefs and systems just as they called us tribes and we accepted. They would tell you, these Banyankore who just drink milk and eat bananas, they are too soft to hold a gun. And then people somehow accepted until rebels like Museveni came and said, I think we can also hold a gun even when we are soft. Then they fueled religious conflicts. One, by allying with Anglo-Protestant Christian groups, isolating the Catholic Christian groups, derogating indigenous religious systems, and telling us that everything associated with our own indigenous religion is satanic, only to discover that they are the worst Satanists. Then they now consolidated their state by weakening or even washing away pre-colonial states. I have told you of kingdoms which were merged and subsumed into other kingdoms, of chiefdoms which were subsumed into other chiefdoms. The other one was to propagate ethno-territorial prejudices. You see those people, they are the ones who started the statement, we cannot wait for the Karamojong to develop. This came after the Karamojong resisted their imposition of imported colonial agents from especially central Uganda, and those that they had recruited amongst the Karamojong. When they resisted, the Karamojong continued with their traditional leadership system, microstate system, which is still present today, and you cannot operate in Karamoja without it. Mamdan called it a bifurcated state. That there was a state of the colonialists which would not leave the headquarters in Moroto. And then there was a state of the Karamojong which was based on their traditional state design. But some new research has discovered that it was actually trifurcated. There was a state of the colonialist agents based in Moroto, the state of the Karamoja agents, which was a go-between, but it also operated according to its rules of the game, and the traditional state, which resisted both states. And that trifurcation exists up to today. The reason why your governments, for those of you who are from the office of the Prime Minister, my brother Charles, the reason why your governments have always failed to understand and solve the problem of Karamoja is because they have not got a good grasp of that trifurcation. They think when I have an RDC in Moroto, I am in charge of Karamoja. You are not in charge. During dry season, we may not wrestle. When it rains and grass grows tall, we can go wrestling. So now, the state in Karamoja operates because the wrestling is done by the Karachuna. The Karachuna are organized herding groups, young people whose job is to look after cattle, protect the households, but also increase on the numbers of the cattle. The principle of state extraction is at play. Every identity group has interest in increasing the herds that they have. Just as any state of Yoweri Museveni has interest in increasing revenue collection from society. Every state gets money from the people it rules, and therefore, or from the neighboring states, through negotiation, bargaining, trade, or looting. So when the Karamojong, when a certain identity group sends their Karachuna to go and steal cattle from among the Turkana in Kenya, you look at it as a primitive practice. I wonder whether you have gone to school. Because when Amin goes to Congo to extract, Museveni goes there to extract, Kagame goes there to extract, Angola went there to extract, the Europeans and Americans are there to extract. Who doesn't do it? When we are looking at these things as upcoming presidents and ministers and legislators, we have to understand the whole difference between interests and ideology as opposed to identity. Then they propagated racial prejudices against Asian migrants. One, by favoring the Asian migrants who had come as coolies to work on favoring them in economic investments. I don't know who signed the lease agreement for the Mamudanis and the Madvanis and these other Asians who came here. Was it the Kabaka who signed the lease agreement? Was it the Chabazinga who signed those lease agreements? But how could those people, where did they get the machinery and the labor for establishing these farms? There must have been something that favored them. Surely a man like Kakunguru or Apollo Kagwa would have set up such a farm. But they didn't want this. Because possibly it was easier for them to control this person who needs more their protection than this person whose allegiance is to the Kabaka. All this is political machination. Then differentiation in state building. Education biases for royals and what have you. You have King's College Budo, then you have Gayaza Girls. All those schools were set up to educate people from the families of the collaborators. Then administrators were deployed strategically. Then laborers were reserved strategically. Then Karamoja was abandoned. Now, politics and religion were also intermarried. From the religio-political conflicts of the 1890s, an alliance was forged between the colonial state and the Anglican Christians, and that alliance has never broken. To date, from 1890s, that alliance has never been broken. My sister talked about the alliance between the Kabaka Yeka and the UPC. The conference was held in London. It was called the London Conference. I suspect one of the unwritten minutes was that these Chiwanukas are Catholics. If you don't put your house in order, they are going to take over. Indeed, since Chiwanuka handed over power to Obote, there has never been a peaceful handover of power. Maybe Wanga handed over to Obote peacefully, but you know the context. Then now you people came. You and your brothers and sisters who are in power now, the Obotes, the Amins, the Musevenis, and all of us here. We have failed to transcend the colonial machinations and build a country that works for all of us. The Tanzanians did it somehow. Nyerere came and his men and they sat down and said, now what we are going to do, number one, no zero grazing. Nyerere called it zero grazing. It was unacceptable to Nyerere to marry from your what? Ethnic group. He called it zero grazing. And he would discourage young men from marrying their own co-ethnics. Please go across and marry there. In the process, people intermarried. When people intermarry, their difference is when people maintain a Puritanist approach to existence, to life, they threaten both the other people they relate with as well as themselves. People who live a Puritanist approach to life will never avoid the propensity for a genocide, an ethnic cleansing, a Holocaust. You won't avoid it. Why? Because when you say for us we are exclusively Jew, it will be easier to differentiate between you and the Palestinian. So, ethno-Puritanism is dangerous. You don't have to agree with me. Racial Puritanism is dangerous. We have a racial group in Uganda, the Indians, who can't intermarry with us or even within themselves. Fine. But the Chinese who came yesterday have integrated faster than the Indians who have been here for 100 years. Why? They have intermarried with us. They are Bako Indians. So, racial Puritanism, ethno-Puritanism, you can love it, you can hate it, you can agree with me, you can disagree with me, but those are the dangers. Now, when Nyerere was saying all of us Swahili, all of us cross-cultural marriages, he was trying to avoid the possibility of developing an ethno-Puritan mentality. Sometime in 2017, I went to South Sudan and I was supposed to advise some people on how South Sudan may build a nation. I told them the ethno-Puritan mentality propagated by the Nuer Council of Elders and the Jeng Council of Elders of the Dinka means that these people will remain suspicious of one another until cows come back home. I am not surprised they are killing themselves today. Whether we hate it or love it. Now, why? Because their leaderships are socialized in that mentality. And their leaderships think that the only person they can trust is this one from their side. So we failed by propagating colonial prejudices and carrying on with them. Religious prejudices, racial prejudices, social linguistic and ethno-regional prejudices. We didn't transcend them. Alliances and counter-alliances, we started forming them based on region, religion, and other forms of identity. We continued and relegated nation-building programs. The first independence government had established an arrangement where there would be scholarships for people going to secondary school. And people would move from Chigezi to Karamoja for their secondary school and spend 6 years there and intermarry with them. People from Odong, those in Nebi would come and be in Sese Island and intermarry.